Chapter 10 of The Trevor Case. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. The Trevor Case by Natalie Sumner Lincoln. Chapter 10. Caught on the Wires. Dick was up betimes the next morning, stopping only long enough to swallow a cup of coffee and a plate of oatmeal. Then, calling a cheery good-bye to Mrs. Brisbane, he banged out of the front door and down the steps in such haste that he collided violently with Uncle Andy Jackson, the Brisbane factotum, who was busy shoveling the snow off the steps. "Laws, Marse Dick," groaned Uncle Andy, picking himself up carefully. "'Pears like you're in a hurry." "Awfully sorry, Uncle," said Dick, helping the old man to his feet. "Here," thrusting some loose change into the ready palm. "Buy some liniment for the bruises. Whew! I didn't realize it snowed so much last night." As far as the eye could see, the large old-fashioned gardens which surrounded the old houses in Georgetown were covered with banks of snow, an unusual sight in the capital city. In some places the drifts were waist-high. "Plenty more snow for old Andy to shovel," grumbled the old man, who dearly loved the sound of his own voice, and seized every opportunity to talk to Dick, whom he especially admired because he belonged to the quality. "'Pears like the sky am a-trying to whitewash dis here wicked city. Last night, sir, I went to hear the Reverend Jedediah Hamilton. He sure am a powerful preacher. He says Satan am a-knockin' at the gates of Washington, dat it am a whitened sepulchre, and dat we all am a-goin' to perdition. Hadn't you better get religion, Marse Dick?" "Oh, I'm not worrying just now, Uncle. You see, my brother John is a minister of the gospel, and I guess he'll intercede for me." "'Twon't do, Marse Dick. The good book, it say, every man shall hear his own burden, and every tongue shall stand on its own bottom." Dick waved his hand in farewell as he plunged through the drifts to cross the street. Uncle Andy watched the tall, athletic figure out of sight, then shook his head solemnly. "'Pears like Marse Dick am past prayin' for," he muttered. Then, hearing Mrs. Brisbane's frantic calls for him, he shouted, "Comin', old miss, comin'." The street cars were blocked by the heavy fall of snow, so Dick had to walk from Georgetown to the Star Building, a distance of nearly 2 miles. Consequently, he was late. But after the first rush of work was over, he stole a moment to call up the White House and ask the names of the night watchmen who were on duty at the executive offices on that fatal Wednesday. "Wait a moment," answered the White House Central, "and I'll find out. Hello. The men were Charlie Flynn and Tom Murray." "Much obliged," called Dick, as he rang off. Luck was certainly with him at last. He had greatly feared that he would not get any information in regard to the mysterious telephone call without a great deal of difficulty and delay, for mum was the word with all the White House employees. But Tom Murray had been General Long's orderly during the campaign in Cuba, and, in fact, owed his present position to the General's influence. Dick knew where he lived, as Tom had married Peggy McAllister's maid, Betty, and once when Betty was ill with typhoid fever, Peggy had asked Dick to go with her to Tom's modest home on Capitol Hill. Dick hurriedly covered his first assignment, rushed back to the office in time to get his story in the afternoon paper, then tore out again and jumped aboard a Navy Yard car. 20 minutes later he was beating a hasty tattoo on the Murray's front door. Tom himself admitted him. "Why, Mr. Tillinghast, sir. I'm mighty glad to see you. Won't you come in?" Dick stepped into the tiny parlor. "I've just stopped by for a moment, Tom. Thought you'd like to know that General Long is in town." Tom fell back a step in his astonishment. "Glory be!" he shouted. "Where is he stopping, sir? That is, if he cares to see me." "At the New Willard. He wants to see you tonight." Tom's face fell. "I can't go, at least not tonight, sir. You see, I'm on night duty at the White House now, sir. I get off at 6 every morning and sleep until noon. I'm just up now, sir. Do you think the General could see me in the afternoon?" "Sure, I'll ask him. By the way, Tom, who answers the White House telephones at night?" "I do, sir. Leastways, I attend to the switchboard in the executive offices." "Do you happen to recollect what person in the White House called up North 123 on February 3rd, or rather February 4th, at 2:15 in the morning?" Tom looked searchingly at his questioner. "Ought I to answer that question, sir?" "I think you should. General Long sent me here to ask you." "May the good Lord forgive me," thought Dick. "I know Chester will back me up." Tom's face cleared. "Then it's all right, sir. I hesitated to answer you, sir, because the call came from the President himself." For a moment Dick was too aghast to speak. The President! Truly his investigations were leading him into deep water. "Are you quite sure, Tom?" he asked soberly. "Quite, sir," with military precision. "I remember the night perfectly, sir. While the White House is often called up at all hours, it ain't usual for inmates of the household to ring up outside calls after midnight. Had you any trouble getting your party?" "No, sir. Central was rather slow about answering, but that was the only delay." "Thanks, Tom. You've helped General Long a lot by telling me all this. Go and see him about 6 tonight on your way to the White House. You will probably catch him then. Is your wife well?" "Yes, sir, thank you. Please tell the General I will be at the hotel without fail. Good-bye, sir." When Dick had departed, Tom walked into his kitchen with a grave face. "I'm afraid, Betty, I talked too freely with Mr. Tillinghast." "Nonsense," snapped Betty, whose temper was apt to get peppery when she worked over a hot fire. "Master Dick isn't the sort to get us into trouble." And that ended the discussion. Dick plodded along the streets too absorbed in thought to notice the snow and ice. Should he or should he not? Well, he would try anyway, so, quickening his steps, he hastened over to the Congressional Library and entered one of the pay-station telephone booths in the building. "What number, please?" asked Central. "Main 6. A few minutes' wait. "Drop in your nickel. There's your party." "Hello, White House. I want to speak to Secretary Burton." "Hello, Burton, that you? This is Dick Tillinghast talking." "Well, Dick, how are you?" "Oh, so-so. Say, Burton, do you think the President would see me alone for a few minutes?" Dick heard Burton whistle. "I know he is fairly busy with the arrival of the Grand Duke Sergius, but I swear it's important. A matter of life and death." Burton detected the earnest note in Dick's voice, and was convinced. "Hold the wire, old man." Dick waited impatiently. So much depended on the answer. "Hello, Central, don't cut me off. Burton, that you?" "Yes. The President says he will see you at 10 minutes of 5, sharp." "Burton, you are a trump. Bye-bye." Prompt to the minute, Dick appeared in the waiting room of the executive offices. Burton came to the door and beckoned to him. "In with you," he whispered. "I sincerely hope your news is of sufficient importance to excuse my sending you in ahead of 2 irate senators," and he gave Dick's broad shoulders an encouraging pat as the door swung open to admit him to the private office. Dick had been frequently thrown with the President, having been one of the reporters detailed to accompany him when he toured the country before his election, but he never entered his presence without feeling the force and personality of the great American who, with unerring hand, was steering the ship of state through such turbulent waters. The President straightened his tall, wiry form as Dick advanced to greet him. His large, dark eyes, set deep under shaggy eyebrows, gazed rather blankly at Dick for a moment, then lighted with recognition as they shook hands. "How are you, Mr. Tillinghast? Sit down here." The President pointed to a large armchair close beside his desk, then he glanced at the clock. "Burton said you wished to see me alone about a matter of life and death." "Well, yes, Mr. President. I put it that way to attract Burton's attention." Then, seeing a frown gathering on the rugged, heavily lined face, he hastened to add, "I came to see you about the Trevor murder." There was no mistaking the President's genuine start of surprise. "To see me? Why?" "I wanted to ask you, sir, who it was answered the telephone when you called up the Attorney General's private office on Thursday morning at 2:15 o'clock." The President leaned thoughtfully back in his chair and regarded Dick intently. Apparently what he saw in his appearance pleased him, for after a prolonged scrutiny, which Dick bore with what equanimity he could, he reached over and touched his desk bell. "Is Secretary Bowers still in the White House?" he asked the attendant who answered his summons. "Yes, Mr. President." "My compliments, and ask him to step here." Dick waited in silence, a good deal perturbed in spirit. What was to pay? The President had but time to gather up some loose papers and put them in his desk when the door opened and admitted his Secretary of State, James Bowers, a man known throughout the length and breadth of the land as representing all that was best in America and Americans. "Your attendant caught me just as I was leaving, Mr. President," he said. "I am entirely at your service." And he bowed gravely to Dick, who had risen on his entrance. "I won't detain you long. You know Mr. Tillinghast?" "Yes," smiled the secretary. "He has interviewed me on many occasions." "Then sit here by me." The President pushed a chair toward him. "Mr. Tillinghast has come to me about the Trevor murder." The secretary raised his eyebrows in surprise. "I leave this matter entirely in your hands, Bowers. Use your judgment in the affair. Now, Mr. Tillinghast, tell us how you found out a telephone call from this office at that particular hour for the Trevor house." Quickly Dick told them, and the two men followed each word with deep attention. After Dick ceased speaking, the secretary sprang from his chair and paced the room rapidly in deep thought. "Tillinghast," he said, stopping abruptly, "what I tell you now is strictly confidential. I am not speaking for publication." "Mr. Secretary," replied Dick quietly, "I give you my word of honor that I shall never make use of what you tell me." "Good. On the whole, I am glad you came, because I was just debating whether or not to send for the chief of police about this very affair. Have I your permission to speak freely to Tillinghast, Mr. President?" "You have." Secretary Bowers settled himself more comfortably in his chair, cleared his throat, and began. "On that Wednesday night I came here to have a secret conference about a matter of national importance. The President and I talked until long after midnight. During our discussion, we found it necessary to get the Attorney General's advice on a vital law point. Knowing that Trevor often stays until daylight in his private office, as I do," a ghost of a smile lighted his lips, "I took the chance on finding him, and rang him up there first, intending, if that failed, to call his house phone. The President's voice and mine are much alike, and it is not surprising that Murray thought it was he calling up Mr. Trevor at that hour. And did he answer you?" asked Dick breathlessly. "No, a woman did." Dick sat back in his chair and gazed hopelessly at the President and then at the secretary. Instantly his thoughts flew to Beatrice. Great heavens! He was almost afraid to ask the next question. Did you by chance recognize her voice?" The secretary hesitated a moment before answering. "She spoke with a decided foreign accent." Again he hesitated. "I called her Mrs. Trevor." "Mrs. Trevor!" gasped Dick. For once words failed him. "Let me describe the scene to you exactly," went on the secretary. "I waited only a few minutes for the connection, and then I heard the faint click of the receiver being removed from the hook. Then a woman's cultivated voice asked, 'Who is it?' I promptly replied, 'Can I speak to your husband, Mrs. Trevor?' She made no answer, but in a second the Attorney General came to the telephone, gave me the desired information, and I rang off." In absolute silence the three men faced each other, with bewilderment and doubt written on their countenances. The long pause was broken by the secretary. "When I first heard of the tragedy, I, like the rest of the world, thought poor Mrs. Trevor had been murdered by the burglar, Nelson. On the day the inquest was held, I received a telegram saying that my wife was dangerously ill with typhoid fever in Cambridge. She had gone there 2 weeks before to be with our son, who is at Harvard. I dropped everything and hastened at once to her bedside. Until the crisis was over, I never left her. And so deep was my anxiety, for the doctors held out little hope that she would recover, that I neglected everything outside the sick room. I left all my business to my private secretary. My wife rallied wonderfully after the crisis was past, and I returned to Washington on last night's Federal. On the trip down, my secretary told me all the developments in the Trevor case. I was simply thunderstruck. In his direct testimony, Mr. Trevor denied being in his private office after his return from the banquet, denied having seen his wife again. He undoubtedly perjured himself," said the President thoughtfully. "Still, even in the face of such evidence, he may be innocent of the crime. For the time being, I shall give him the benefit of the doubt." "You are right and very just, Mr. President," exclaimed the Secretary. "This phase of the case must be sifted to the bottom in absolute secrecy. It would be ruinous to let the outside world know you can even suspect your Attorney General guilty of murder. The effect would be appalling. Now, Tillinghast," he spoke with greater emphasis, "I know you to be a man of integrity. You have already shown great skill in this affair. Therefore, I am going to ask you to go and see the Attorney General as my representative and ask him for an explanation. Then come and report to me. I could send one of the Secret Service men, but the fewer people involved in this scandal the better." "I'll do my very best, Mr. Secretary, to merit your trust," said Dick warmly. "But how am I to reach the Attorney General? He refuses to see any newspaper men." "That is easily arranged," said the Secretary. "May I borrow pen and ink, Mr. President?" drawing some notepaper toward him as he spoke. "I'll write a few lines asking him to see you. That will be all that is necessary." Quickly Secretary Bowers's hand traveled over the paper. Then, folding it neatly, he handed the note to Dick, saying, "Don't fail us, Tillinghast. Remember we depend on your tact and discretion. I would see Trevor myself, but my time is entirely taken up with the Grand Duke Sergius's presence in the city. He dines with the President tonight, as you doubtless know." "Come in," called the President, as a discreet knock interrupted the Secretary. Burton entered and handed him a note. This is marked immediate and personal, Mr. President. Recognizing the handwriting, I brought it right in." As the President tore open the envelope and rapidly read its contents, Secretary Bowers turned to Dick, who was standing by the desk awaiting an opportunity to depart, and said quickly, "Come and see me at the State Department tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock." The President signaled to Burton to withdraw. Then he looked directly at the Secretary of State and Dick. "This," he said, tapping the letter in his hand, "is from Mr. Trevor, tendering me his resignation as my Attorney General on the ground of ill health." Chapter 11.